my good friend Josette. And thank you to Auburn University's College of Honor Sciences and the Global Partnership Forum for this wonderful honor. You know, when I read the list of recipients for the International Quality of Life Award, I was overwhelmed by the breadth and depth of experience and impact. But one name Josette mentioned jumped out at me. Dr. Norman Borlaug was a Rockefeller Foundation scientist, a global icon, a Nobel Prize winner. He received this award in 2006 for leading a world-changing effort called the Green Revolution. It fed over 1 billion starving people in Mexico, South and Southeast Asia. Dr. Borlaug was driven by a simple belief that food is the moral right of all who are here in this world. Dean Henton and Auburn students really share this view, and I am so honored, particularly, to receive this award from you. Certainly many of the things you've done over the years, but most recently with the creation of Universities Fighting World Hunger, which is now one of the Rockefeller Foundation's newest grantees. For centuries, has been quick to point out that I was nominated for this award before that. For centuries, universities have been the laboratories where we invent and experiment with solutions to our greatest challenges, where we push the frontiers of possibility. And for more than 100 years, foundations like Rockefeller have scaled the life-saving and world-changing innovations of academia so that more people everywhere in the world can share in progress. That work, the work of institutions like Auburn and Rockefeller, isn't easy, but we have never needed it more than we need it today. The world is racing to a global population of 9 billion people. Rapid industrialization, urbanization, globalization, and climate change have created public health, security, and economic challenges perhaps never before seen in human history. And yet, at a time when we need strong national and global institutions more than ever, we face an existential threat. In just the past year, a global populist movement stretching from Britain to the Philippines to the United States has ignited a dangerous mistrust and resentment of institutions at every level: political, economic, academic, and beyond. Our institutions must survive for civil society to thrive, but clearly they must also change. When they're tested by short-term shocks or longer-term stresses, they must bend, but not break. They must be, in a word, resilient. During my time as president of the Rockefeller Foundation, my colleagues and I have focused intently on making institutions, cities, and systems more resilient, better able to prepare for disruption, to recover more quickly and effectively after disruption occurs, and finally to adapt and to grow in the face of crisis. Whether we're working on health or inequality, food waste, energy, water, our interventions build resilience by enhancing 5 core capacities. In brief, they are awareness, the ability to quickly gather and analyze information; adaptiveness, the ability to use all available sources of information effectively in order to respond more flexibly in times of crisis; diversity, action informed by and more effectively using a variety of ideas, opinions, and strategies; integration, ensuring that all individual components work strategically and synchronously together; and finally, and importantly, the ability to fail safely so that when something does go wrong, it doesn't sink the ship. These characteristics of resilience will be all the more important in the years to come, and not only for institutions, but also for those who are guiding our institutions through the uncharted waters of the 21st century. This evening, I'd like to briefly share 5 leadership lessons that illustrate these characteristics, because as we enter a new year in a new global reality, they will be the tools with which we will build a stronger, healthier, and more prosperous future for all. Lesson 1, be mindful. First comes awareness, assessing all relevant information in real time in order to understand what's happening and make the right decision when the stakes are the highest. On the night of October 31st in 1996, tragedy struck the University of Pennsylvania, where I had recently assumed the role of president. A graduate student was brutally attacked while walking home to his apartment in West Philadelphia. At the time, Penn was surrounded by a dying neighborhood, shuttered houses and drug-ridden parks, failing schools, and few jobs. We had become an ivory tower, but in the middle of a community plagued by violence, poverty, and crime. After his murder, we knew things had to change. But we didn't begin by putting more police on the street or more buses to transport our students safely around West Philadelphia. We began with deep, multi-layered situational analysis and hypothesis testing. And in fact, our new awareness revealed that polices and buses were the wrong answer. What we had to do was create a safer, healthy, more prosperous community for everyone in West Philadelphia. So we launched an ambitious multi-year campaign, which Josette mentioned. We lit the sidewalks and greened the neighborhood and restored safe streets. We renovated hundreds of homes and apartments for low-income residents. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars to create and attract new businesses, including bookstores, movie theaters, supermarkets. We spawned economic development in the area by a Buy and Hire West Philadelphia First program. We partnered with the city and the school district to open neighborhood public schools, the first of their kind, to attract families back to the neighborhood. To fix the root cause of a problem, in this case crime, you have to understand all the elements first. It was awareness that helped us to see what we in the community of West Philadelphia needed and what Penn could do to help create a safer, more productive life for all who lived there, our faculty, our students, and our neighbors. The second lesson is be flexible. We can reduce the frequency of crises, but we can never eliminate them completely. So the second characteristic of resilient leadership is adaptiveness. If you respond rigidly to a crisis, you actually risk compounding the damage. But if you're flexible, if you can adapt, you can help those who are affected weather the storm and emerge stronger on the other side. It was already mentioned in talking about the Drummond family's noble efforts, one of the deadliest disasters in Japan's history, the 2011 earthquake and tsunami, which caused a major meltdown at the Fukushima nuclear plant. While this disaster was unfolding, the Japanese prime minister wanted to look like a leader. So he went to the nuclear facility and he started giving direct orders to the workers in charge of the damaged reactors, a confusing and dangerous decision that could have put many, many more people at risk. Luckily, the workers knew more about nuclear activity than the prime minister, so they ignored his orders, and their heroic efforts saved many more lives. By contrast, the leadership of Toyota took a very different approach. Toyota, as you know, is one of Japan's largest companies. The earthquake could have completely crippled their operations and Japan's economy. But Toyota's leaders have spent years developing flexible decision-making practices, training their employees to gather and share information quickly and respond adaptively to crises. They knew their workers on the ground were the ones getting real-time information. So when the earthquake hit, instead of barking out orders, the executives let the employees call the shots, and it worked. Toyota lost 370,000 vehicles in the earthquake, but its operations were back up and running in just 2 weeks. And in the aftermath of disaster, the company's leaders showed the same flexibility to accelerate innovation. They worked with some of their hardest hit suppliers to develop new types of paints, finishes, and designs using only the materials that were still readily at hand after the earthquake. Just 2 years later, Toyota was once again the #1 automaker in the world. Lesson 3 is seek out diversity. As you can see from these stories, one from West Philadelphia and one from Japan, great ideas come from anywhere. They come from everywhere. When you bring together different opinions and perspectives, you learn things that you wouldn't learn otherwise. That's why we need diversity. Consider the story of Medellin, Colombia. In the 1980s and 90s, Medellin was the murder capital of the world, a haven for drug trafficking, crime, and homicide, and home to Pablo Escobar's famous Medellin cartel. The city leaders had already engaged their own police force, national troops, even the US government. Nothing they did worked. So they took an entirely new approach. They brought together businesses, community groups, NGOs, architects, and ordinary citizens, and asked them to work together to think through a possible new solution. Together, working together, sharing diverse views, they came to an extraordinary realization. Medellin's poorest and most vulnerable communities were locked away, tucked away on steep hillsides, only accessible by foot. So they had little access to the economic center of the city, the facilities, the opportunities that the city provided. Because of this isolation, drug traffickers and gangs had been able to take over the streets in the poorest barrios. The problem in Medellin, it turned out, wasn't a lack of the right crime-fighting force. It was a lack of mobility and accessibility. What followed was remarkable. The city's leaders built an extraordinary transit system of trains and cable cars and gondolas and giant hillside escalators. They literally, physically bridged the gap between the city and its poorest communities. They also built new schools and public spaces, artistic venues, libraries, and social programs, many of them near the newly accessible transit stations. Employment opportunities for the city's most vulnerable residents doubled. Today, because its leaders welcomed ideas from diverse places and diverse groups of people, Medellin's economy is growing and its homicide rate is down 90%. It is now consistently rated one of the best Latin American cities to call home. Lesson 4, to understand and connect the big picture. Seeking out new ideas often leads to unexpected breakthroughs like Medellin's transit system. But collecting diverse ideas isn't enough. Leaders must integrate these ideas strategically and systemically into a larger whole. Consider the story of Canadian entrepreneur Stuart Butterfield. In 2003, Butterfield and his team were trying to develop an online role-playing video game with repeated and frustrating failures. However, the game had an interesting side feature, a mechanism that allowed players to share and interact with one another's photos. In the process of developing the game, Butterfield and his teammates realized that the photo sharing mechanism had a lot of potential. So they iterated, they collaborated, and then they integrated. As a result of this integration, they came up with new designs and new lines of code. And eventually, they turned this side feature into their new company, Flickr. Butterfield displayed many aspects of resilient leadership: awareness of new trends and opportunities for innovation, adaptiveness to unexpected disruption when the game proved unsuccessful. But most of all, Butterfield demonstrated the importance of integration. By synthesizing new information and suggestions and diverse designs and engineering elements, he was able to form an entirely new and different integrated whole. Lesson 5, Failure is okay, but learn to fail safely. Of course, before Flickr could succeed, the gaming company had to fail, which brings me to this, the final characteristic of resilient leadership, failing safely. In 1981, a tornado hit Twin Cities, devastating the flagship store of a small electronics chain called Sound of Music. Its roof was torn off, its showroom was demolished, its future looked terribly bleak. But the tornado had left one thing intact, the storeroom. So the Sound of Music CEO, Richard Schulze, had a choice. He could shut down and slowly rebuild the business in the same mold, a mold with showrooms and salesmen on commission and home delivery, or he could take the opportunity to adapt and transform. Schulze decided to hold a tornado sale. Sound of Music would put all the remaining stock in a big tent, they would slash the prices, and let consumers browse and shop and carry their purchases out themselves. In one 4-day sale, the Sound of Music made more money than it did usually in a month. So Schulze and his management team shuttered the old business model and made the tornado sale model permanent. They restocked their inventory and they rebranded their company, which we now know as Best Buy. Today, of course, Best Buy has become the largest electronics retailer in the world, weathering lots of other disruptions along the way, from globalization to the rise of Amazon. Through it all, though, they have never forgotten the lesson of the tornado sale, that leaders can never really create perfect systems, but they can create systems capable of withstanding a major disruption, evolve from it quickly. That's what we mean by failing safely. So in conclusion, remember these 5: awareness, flexibility, diversity, integration, and safe failure.